Hello, everyone. Good morning from Toronto, Canada. A very warm welcome to our amazing panelists and our wonderful audience to the road to COP26, an intergenerational and multilateral conversation on climate justice organized by the Parliament of the World's Religions Next Generation Task Force. My name is Kehkasha. I am the youngest trustee of the Parliament of the World's Religions, a member of the Parliament's Next Gen Task Force, and the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I am delighted to be your moderator today. The Parliament of the World's Religions envisions a peaceful, just, and sustainable world for all, cultivating harmony amongst the world's religions and spiritual communities and fostering their engagement with the world and its guiding institutions to address the most critical issues of our time, with one of them being, of course, climate change. Now, the drivers of climate change and environmental degradation are deeply rooted in our societies and economies. So, mitigating the impacts of climate change requires transformative changes on both the demand and supply sides, including conscious lifestyle changes affecting consumption preferences and behavior, cleaner production processes, greater resource efficiency, and corporate responsibility. Injustice and exploitation are at the root of climate change. Its impacts are, of course, felt most by people, communities, and countries that are least responsible for it. The weak and vulnerable women and girls, coastal and indigenous communities, the original keepers of our lands are the ones who are bearing the impacts of climate change. And the irony is that they are the ones who are the most proactive in the conservation process, while those who cause the largest emissions often join and leave international action treaties at will. There is a gross lack of accountability, and that is why the needle of tolerance keeps moving up with each COP as we resign ourselves to living in a hotter planet in the years to come. However, the enforced lockdown during the pandemic and the few months of clear skies and green spaces seems to have struck a chord amongst even the most arrogant skeptics. We see at an unprecedented level of dialogue and intent to move towards a green economy, towards decarbonization. And COP26 has taken on a significance like no other for leaders, policymakers, interfaith and faith-based organizations, grassroots civil society bodies seem to have far greater unanimity on the need for change, for implementing measures that may ultimately lead to a fossil fuel-free world. That is why today's discussion takes on a special meaning. Our intergenerational, interfaith, and multidisciplinary panel of experts will discuss the steps, the priorities, and the milestones that need to be set that will enable the enactment and adoption of a transformative climate action plan and implementation plan at COP26. With that, we shall begin our panel discussion. And just before we go ahead, I would like to inform our audience that you can post your questions in the Q&A box, and our panelists would be happy to answer them after their remarks. So without any further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Her Excellency Susan Lejeune Dalgairzec, Britain's High Commissioner to Canada. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kehkasha, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the panel this morning. You and I had a really interesting conversation about these issues a couple of months ago, and it's great now to be able to share the UK's vision for COP26 with a wider audience. As you know, and I'm sure everybody else on this call knows, we had to postpone COP26, which was due to take place last November in Glasgow, and it will now take place this coming November The UK is absolutely delighted to be hosting this conference at such an important moment. As you pointed out, Kekeshan, this is the moment we have to take action. We cannot postpone it any longer. You know, time is not running out, time has run out. If we're going to do what we need to do to get towards that 1.5 or 2 degree absolute maximum of global warming, now is the moment to take action. And I think actually the postponement in some ways has been good for us, because it means that we have seen that when the international community really needs to get together and take action, it can do it. It can do things that people thought were absolutely impossible a year ago. Develop and use a vaccine within 12 months, absolutely unheard of. Now we've shown it's possible. And we need to harness that same energy and that same commitment to the goal with regard to climate change. This COP needs to translate the Paris rulebook into agreed actions for the future. We need to do it in an inclusive way. We need to make sure that the voices of not just of governments, as you pointed out, are heard. And that is why we are adopting a truly inclusive approach to the preparation of the conference and to the conference itself. You're right, these issues impact vulnerable communities and vulnerable individuals far more than they do the population at large. The statistics that were given to me said that 75% of people displaced by natural disasters are women and children, and that they are 14 times more likely to die as a result of climate-related disasters than men are. So we need those different views at the table to ensure that the actions that we take and the solutions that we design are relevant to everybody and leave nobody behind. We see those voices as drivers for change. We've seen in previous COPs that the loudest voices at the table are very often not those of governments, because as you pointed out, governments tend to be risk averse. They tend to take into account all sorts of factors, which are the ones that they claim make it more difficult to take action. So hearing those voices and amplifying them and making sure that they have a voice at the table is really, really important. We know as well that Indigenous peoples are the stewards of 80% of the world's biodiversity, the world's remaining biodiversity, I would say, because we've lost quite a lot of it already. Those Indigenous communities have unique knowledge to bring to the table about how they have conserved their natural habitats for generations, for millennia. And we need to make sure that we take account of their experience in formulating policies for today. And similarly, the voices of young people have been heard so loudly in the climate debate that we need to make sure that young people like yourself and the other people on this call also have a place at the table, and not as a sideshow. You know, I think in the past, sometimes major international conferences have involved governments at the table, and then alternative voices have been heard or put in a separate room. That is not the vision for COP26. And we are working really closely with the Canadian government and others, but particularly with the Canadian government on these issues. And we believe that this is a time when we can really make huge progress. So I think that's probably enough as an introduction, and I'll hand over to the next speaker. But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And yes, time has run out. And of course, the pandemic has shown us that multilateralism is possible. And if we put in that extra effort, it is possible for nations and societies to come together to bring about positive change, as seen with how we have addressed the pandemic. And of course, the solutions that needs to be implemented needs to take everyone into account and leave no one behind, as is the mandate also of the SDGs. And of course, we need all voices at the table. So thank you so much for sharing what the UK is doing, as well as sharing your perspectives with us today. And with that, I shall invite our next speaker, Dr. Magdalen Lambkin, Development Director of Interfaith Glasgow. Dr. Lambkin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kekeshan. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. It's a real pleasure. So as Kekishan said, I am the Development Director of Interfaith Glasgow, which is a Scottish charity specialising in facilitating constructive engagement between people from different faith and belief communities in Glasgow, so as to help create a better connected, safer and more harmonious city for all. We develop programmes aimed at building friendships, fostering greater mutual understanding, challenging prejudices and misconceptions, and finally, increasing opportunities for people from different faith and belief backgrounds to work cooperatively to address issues of common concern. And there is no greater issue of common concern that requires us to work cooperatively than the climate crisis. Yesterday marked a year since the coronavirus lockdown in the UK, during which time we, like so many others, have moved our activities online. Before that, preparations for community engagement, faith community engagement with COP26 in Glasgow had begun. We were working with Interfaith Scotland, Scotland's national charity for interfaith engagement, to convene meetings in Glasgow for faith-based organisations and faith communities who wanted to support each other in their climate activism. COP was then postponed, as we all know, and these meetings went on hold, while we and all those we work with tried to deal with the urgent matters facing our communities, issues of isolation, loss, and for many people in Glasgow, access to food. After some months, we began meeting again, this time online, and as a result, the possibilities for engagement feel like they have expanded massively, and our connections with people and organisations around the world who share our concerns are increasing all the time. Being part of this meeting today is a reflection of that, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to connect with you all. There is a sense that, given the postponement of this urgent, critical meeting for a whole year, we must make sure that we use this time well, as Susan has said. COP26 is being referred to as our last best chance to tackle the climate crisis, and this is the message that we will be sharing with local faith communities over the next 6 months. They have an important part to play in the great civil society movement that has come together and is building momentum in Scotland, the UK and beyond. There'll be many, many events happening in the run-up to and during COP, both online and in person. And if you want to find out more about that, you can visit the Climate Fringe website at climatefringe.org. But there's also great strength in faith communities coming together on an interfaith platform. Climate change as an existential issue calls on our core values, an understanding of life to guide us to action and crucially to transformation. Listening to activists from diverse backgrounds, what I've heard is that there is a need for a climate movement that is driven by values and that can address the root cause of this crisis, that of a fundamental disconnection between people and the earth, a disconnection that has allowed humanity to treat this planet as yet another commodity. We need to repair that relationship, and faith communities have deep wells of wisdom, far-reaching networks, and practical tools to help us. The director of Green Faith, the Reverend Fletcher Harper, spoke at a recent event of ours, and he said that the biggest thing that religious communities need to do is to be bold. Massive problems require visionary solutions. This has been recognised by Scotland's diverse religious leaders at the national level. The Scottish Religious Leaders Forum, which is convened by Interfaith Scotland, released a statement early this year in anticipation of COP. In it, they said, "We call for transformational change in our lives, our communities, our economies, and our governments. We recognise that humanity has exploited the planet, causing climate change, and that the burden of loss and damage falls most heavily on the poor, especially women and children. We call for care for each other and care of the earth to be the highest duty in all our lives." And I'll put the link to that statement in the chat afterwards so that you can read it in full if you want to. The focal point for our plans for specifically interfaith action for COP26 is a prayer and meditation vigil on the 31st of October, the Sunday before COP begins. Our intention is to bring together religious leaders and faith community members, both locals and those who travel to Glasgow for the COP, people from across the world's faith traditions, and including Indigenous leaders who plan to make the long journey here. To come together in Glasgow's main square, to pray or meditate alongside each other in the manner of their tradition. We want to send a message of hope and solidarity in a very public way to those involved in the negotiations and on whose shoulders so much responsibility rests. We expect that there will be plenty of limits in place as to how many people we can bring together physically, but we want to make it possible for people to participate no matter where they are in the world. And so we will live stream the vigil and work with partners across the world to broadcast it and to encourage people to share their prayers for COP via social media. We want to create a sense that the world is present in Glasgow during this pivotal time. While we have the advantage of being here in Glasgow and where there's lots of enthusiasm and support on the ground, we don't have a big PR budget and we're at the early stages of planning. So I'd like to finish by saying that if there's anyone listening who has experience in this area, or if you think your organization could help share the vigil or call to prayer, please do get in touch. We'd really love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magdalen. First of all, thank you for bringing the interfaith and faith-based perspective that is so important in this dialogue. And you're right, the climate movement does need to be driven by values. And what you talked about, that is the embodiment of climate justice, even more so than just climate action. It's the climate justice that needs to be worked on right now. So we really leave no one behind, as was mentioned earlier. So thank you once again. And with that, I am delighted to invite our next speaker, Ray Bainteti, co-founder and chair of the Kiribati Aotearoa Diaspora Directorate Charitable Trust. Ray, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jeune, and just like to acknowledge our previous speakers, the Excellency and Dr. Magdalen. Very good morning from the South Pacific. It's very early hours of the morning. It's about 3 a.m. in the morning. So please bear with me. I'm not normally a morning person. I'll try my best to also contribute to this very important discussion. So as we know, climate change has been, forcing people to move away from their land and homes and placing more at risk of displacement. The conversation and the urgency around, our key messaging towards the COP26 is important, that it's addressed with the urgency. And I really wanted to, contribute to this discussion using displacement and migration, because that has been something that I've been engaged with for many years because of my personal connection to displacement as well, because of environmental degradation. Anyway, the IPCC special report on the 1.5 degrees clearly states that even if we keep the 1.5 degree goal, we will still face severe loss and damage from climate change impacts, including climate forced displacement and migration. In the region, in the Pacific, storm surges, more intense droughts, rising sea levels, salt water intrusion into water tables of low-lying atoll nations, and other impacts have been evident, especially in low-lying atoll nations like Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, and it is affecting particularly the most vulnerable ones, the women, children, and it is estimated that more internal displacement would result from these if and that would affect the population of these low-lying atoll countries. So just to put some statistics around these and why the urgency, the Talanoa Dialogue Synthesis Report that was published in 2018 estimated a total of 11,000 extreme weather events, which occurred between 1997 and 2016 worldwide, which resulted in about 524,000 deaths, and the damage was equivalent to USD 3.16 trillion. And since 2008, about 200 million people have been displaced by extreme weather. In 2017, it was believed that the economic loss associated with severe weather and climate events amounted to USD 320 billion, and that was the highest figure recorded. And the economic cost of, of the climate change impact is really, especially in times of COVID-19, there is another wake-up call for us for the urgency to address this in this upcoming COP26. And the importance, as we all know, for the Pacific, climate forced migration displacement is already underway and have been documented in some Pacific islands, projecting a number of communities that will have been displaced or have been relocated. So responding to these growing realities demand far stronger action towards ending global climate pollution, supporting resilient communities, ensuring rights for people on the move, and developing long-term strategies to ensure those who are forced to move now and in the future are able to be relocated or migrate safely and with dignity. And there is no doubt that the number of communities being displaced is likely to increase as climate change impacts become more frequent and severe, particularly from flooding, coastal erosion, storms, and sea level rise, and more recently now from salt water intrusion, affecting water table of low-lying atoll nations that will affect water security in these countries. So as our role for Pacific civil society, we have been involved in a lot of COP, and the COP21, which was I was part of, a lot needs to be implemented from the Paris Accord. And these COP meetings have been going for many years. We are almost the same age with the COPs. But I always have the feeling that it hasn't matured enough to actually take bold action to address what our civil societies have been calling for. And that saddens us because the urgency is right now. And so as a way of closing, I'd like to respectfully call again on all our global community actors and stakeholders who've got different entry points and synergies that they could influence, particularly our world leaders. I hope that they do not politicize climate change. It is a matter of life and death for many communities, particularly the indigenous communities around the world that are becoming extinct if nothing is taken boldly to address climate change. So with that note, I thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rui. First of all, thank you for joining us at 3 a.m. and sharing your important perspectives with us. And you're right, the Indigenous worldview is absolutely essential to the climate and actually the overall sustainability dialogue. So thank you so much for bringing up those really important points, and especially about addressing the problems of those who are the farthest first and affected most by climate change-induced disasters that go beyond just the first impact, but instead affect the migration patterns and so many other challenges that arise from such issues. So thank you once again, Ray. And I now invite our next speaker, Erin Isabel, Outreach Officer of Green Hope Foundation. Erin, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm glad to be here today to discuss such a vital topic that centers on how different sections of society can ultimately shape a sustainable future. I definitely think that COP26 will be essential for more extensive and direct action concerning climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic shifted our focus to an entirely different but yet important area. Still, as everything sizzles down, I think that we must refocus and strategize for the next 29 years, because what we do now will ultimately shape the planet that future generations, including mine, will have to thrive on. Some of the most pressing and urgent issues that must be combated include the fact that average global temperature is 0.2 degrees Celsius higher than in 2015 to 2019, the flooding and bushfires that this has worsened in low-lying nations, and melting glaciers, which of course contributes to rising sea levels. It is essential to consider that almost every religion talks about how important the environment is and how it is a gift. That is why it is so vital that we invest our resources and time into taking care of it and preserving it from all of our artificial chaos. I completely stand with the COP26 proposal, which urges all countries to set emission reduction targets that put us on a path to net zero by 2030. Without a doubt, implementing policies that stride towards net zero will minimize those aforementioned effects that face our planet. From ending the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles, substituting the usage of fossil fuels to generate power, and embracing green and sustainable technology, we can certainly make the net zero target a reality. COP26 will be critical in ensuring that every country in the UNFCCC has a credible plan to manage the aftermath of climate change and further protect our planet and its inhabitants. Besides those larger scale actions, I'm confident that grassroots, hands down community action can also make the most significant impact. Greenhope works extensively on climate justice and mitigating the effects of climate change. We plant trees throughout the world, engage communities in waste segregation, cleanups, recycling, and upcycling, thereby reducing the waste that goes into landfills. Over the past few years, Greenhope has planted over 142,000 trees, conducted 208 cleanups, planted 5,700 mangroves, and recycled over 2,000 tons of waste globally. Greenhope has also conducted climate change conferences at universities and schools across the planet, emphasizing that we as young people must lead the transition to a sustainable world by fighting global warming and climate change. A few days ago, Greenhope conducted 2 very successful workshops on eating healthy and eating local for the students of schools in Toronto and Ottawa. We also recently led an SDG Academy for the students at a school in Seychelles to inform them about the SDGs as per our own climate justice philosophy and the UN mandate of ensuring that no one is left behind on the road to progress. Through our advocacy and learning programs, we engage those who have been traditionally excluded from the climate change dialogue, providing them with the knowledge to reduce their carbon footprints and changing behaviors. In Liberia, Greenhope installed solar panels for the houses and schools in a village to provide computer literacy to the women and girls after school hours. Greenhope strongly believes in affordable and clean renewable energy, which is goal 7 of the SDGs. Energy is one of the main contributors to climate change. It accounts for 73% of human greenhouse gas emissions. This is clearly a call to expand infrastructure and upgrade technology to provide clean and more efficient energy in all countries to ultimately bolster economic growth and help the environment. In a village in Bangladesh, Greenhope installed rainwater harvesting systems through which we can create climate-smart regenerative economies. We also work on organic farming that enables the villagers to move towards climate-smart agriculture that is in sync with the natural order and moves away from the human imposition on land in conventional agricultural practices. We do this by distributing organic seeds and training the villagers on organic farming. We have also conducted a multitude of intergenerational webinars that have featured stellar panelists, where we have essential conversations on topics like the circular economy, nature-based solutions, and even rebuilding better from this pandemic. As the youth of today, I genuinely hope that COP26 is not just another event criticizing the work of other governments and shouting slogans, but instead a platform for world leaders to combat climate change and discuss the actual implementation of grassroots actions to pave the way to a better and more resilient planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for sharing Green Hope Foundation's work. It's really amazing. And yeah, I think it's really important that COP26 is that moment of change for everyone to ensure that we don't just look at COP26 as the end goal, but look beyond it to see what actions, grassroots actions we can implement on the ground to bring about positive change. So thank you once again, Erin. And thank you to all of our panelists for that amazing dialogue and for sharing your perspectives and remarks with us today. And we shall now take questions from the audience. The first question that I see is from Rick Lanthrop. And the question is, what specific concerted actions can be taken by youth to ensure decision makers understand and take action to mitigate the existential effect of climate change on future generations? So yes, Your Excellency.
Please call me Susan. I hate being called Your Excellency. So I think the first thing I would say to young people is to use their vote. You know, I think the people taking action on this stuff are governments. So every single young person, some countries over the age of 16, some over the age of 18, has a vote. Use that vote wisely and make sure your vote counts, first of all. Second, I think the grassroots impact of consumer behavior on companies, because we haven't talked about the private sector at all in this conversation so far. You know, what private sector companies care about is making money. And if the consumer changes their behavior and demands more or different things from the private sector, that will have a huge impact on policy, on behavior, and particularly, I mean, we've seen some of the world's largest investment companies changing their stance on climate-related issues, and that is as a result of the views being expressed by their investors. So I think that's a really important point. And there are individual things we can all do every day. I mean, some of the changes in my own behavior, to be quite honest with you, have been as a result of things my kids have said to me. You know, we listen to our children, and when one of my children said to me, Mum, I think you and Dad, or Dad in particular, should eat less red meat, you know, you listen to what your kids say to you. So I think that's the other thing. You know, it can start at home, it goes through your consumer behavior, and then it goes on, most importantly, to your vote. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Would anyone else like to answer that question? Or if not, I can actually move on to the next question, which is from Daniel Eastman. What kind of interfaith action is going on in the United States around climate justice, and how can people get connected to those efforts?
Shall I come in on this one?
Yes, please go ahead.
I mean, I'm not based in the United States. I'm in Scotland, in the UK, but we have connected recently with Greenfaith, which is a huge network in the United States and now global. There's Greenfaith International as well. So I would recommend that you check out greenfaith.org. They have something called Greenfaith Circles, so that you actually have resources there for you to set up your own interfaith group that is focused on climate justice. And they have laid out 10 very bold demands that they're encouraging people to get behind in terms of climate justice. So that is where I would look to if I was in the States.
Thank you, Magdalen. Would anyone else like to answer that? Or if not, then Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the great things that's happening at the grassroots level is that there is a lot of individual faith communities, local interfaith or interreligious organizations that are doing some great grassroots climate work. I think if you're interested in the United States overall, like Magdalen said, Greenfaith, Faith and Light are some great organizations to look at the national level. But of course, I would also encourage you to look at some of the directories that exist. The Parliament actually has a climate commitments web hub that tracks a lot of the grassroots based organizations and organizers that are doing work on the ground. So if you're interested in getting engaged locally in the US, that would be a great place to start.
Amazing. Thank you, Miriam. Would anyone else like to answer, or we can go on to our next question? I am receiving some questions here from other panelists who are unable to access the Q&A box. And this question is from Eliza Dunlop, and it's for you, Susan. Given the current situation, don't you think that the COP should be entirely virtual? And because in this way, we can reduce our carbon footprint and also protect our health.
Thank you. I think that COP in Glasgow will not be like previous COPs have been. So I undoubtedly, I'm pretty clear that it won't be the massive gathering of people that we've seen in previous years. And you're absolutely right to point out that, you know, flying tens of thousands of people around the world to a climate conference, there is a there's a slight contradiction there in terms of what we're trying to achieve. At the same time, a lot of COP is about negotiation, and I've been involved in negotiation a lot in my career, and I know that you can't negotiate effectively over a Zoom call. So there will have to be a certain number of people who are in the same room together, because it will not happen if we're trying to do it like this. So the final format is obviously yet to be defined, because I couldn't tell you. Perhaps Dr. Magdalen has a better idea of what Glasgow is going to look like in November, but I mean, I just don't know. The UK quite clearly is going in a very positive direction in terms of the number of people who have been vaccinated in the UK, but obviously that's not the same situation around the world. One of the things I'd say more generally is that I think, having seen how much of this stuff we can do effectively virtually, I think there will be far fewer people traveling around the world for meetings than there were in the past. And I think that's a good thing. And I think particularly massive, great conferences with 20, 30,000 people in whatever context it is, descending on Vancouver, 30,000 dentists was the best example I had, descending on Vancouver. I mean, it just doesn't make sense anymore, because we have seen how effective this sort of thing can be for everything, I would say, apart from sensitive negotiation of texts, and that is much more difficult to do virtually. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Magdalen, would you like to answer that as well?
Well, I mean, my understanding is in agreement with Susan there, that we're not going to have the levels of people coming to Glasgow that we might have expected pre-COVID. When we were thinking about this for COP that was due to happen last year, we were imagining trying to fill the streets and show people power by people being together in Glasgow's main square by their numbers. And we're now having to think about that differently and think creatively, but it does present an opportunity for people around the world to feel like they're taking part. If there's a significant online element to what is happening around COP, then it does mean that people everywhere who have internet access, and I know that's a real issue as well, but those who do have internet access can take part and can really make their voices heard. And we're hoping to capitalize on that and make the best of the fact that people can't come together physically in the way they once did. And the questioner is right, of course, that lots of flights around the world is problematic and perhaps sends the wrong message, and can end up with the charge of hypocrisy when climate campaigners are traveling around the world to do their business. So I think there's a real opportunity here, and I hope that all of you here and the people listening to the call will get involved and will feel like they can make a difference.
Thank you, Magdalen. We have another question. This is from the Parliament. How is COP26 working to provide engagement opportunities for women, children, and Indigenous peoples? And what more can be done and should be done? So
do you want me to answer that one again, seeing this is about the how? So I think it's very clear that the whole way in which we've approached this is to be as inclusive as possible for the reasons that I outlined right at the beginning. So, you know, at a local level here in Canada, we have engaged with all sorts of different communities, and we have a really ambitious program of events between now and November to make sure that we talk to everybody. And there's a huge amount of youth engagement in particular. We've got the Italian government is running a youth event in Milan with about 400 people due to participate in that, and that will feed into the COP conference itself. We've supported the Resilient 40, a network of 60 climate champions, young climate champions from 29 countries in Africa. We have a youth steering group that we ourselves have put together in order to make sure that their voices are heard. And finally, there is a specific team within our COP26 unit in London to make sure that you know, that they engage properly with youth. I mean, you know, governments are not particularly good at this. Let's be honest, not particularly good at this thing, you know, generally, because governments tend to be, you know, of a different generation. And I think we recognise that in this field in particular, engaging with young people is absolutely crucial. And there will also be an Indigenous element to this. So our COP26 President Designate, Alok Sharma, has been participating in work with the Indigenous Peoples Forum on climate change, and he will continue that because we recognise, as I said right at the beginning, the importance of taking into account the voices of those people who are probably the most affected by climate change. Thanks.
thank you, Susan. Ray, would you like to answer the latter part of the question, at least on what can be done and what you would see be a good way to engage everyone? Ray, are you able to hear us? Oh, Ray disappeared. Okay, we shall come back to him, but we have time for one last question. And yes, so this person is anonymous. Thank you, Green Hope, for sharing the wonderful work, and thank you, Parliament, for organizing this talk. We need more localized solutions, but funding is a huge problem. How will you ensure that funding goes to the right people and right communities who actually need help? The floor is open. Yes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. The question is funding. We need more localized solutions, but funding is a huge problem. How will you ensure that funding goes to the right people in right communities who actually need help?
I don't think that's a question for me. I'm not sure who it is for, though.
It's a general.
Well, if I had the purse strings, that would be a great thing. And Ray is back. Welcome back, Ray.
Hi, Ray. Welcome back. Yes.
Sorry, guys. My connection is not. I think it's failing on me, but I'm back.
No worries. We actually, reason we wanted to ask you is that would you like to answer the previous question on what do you think can be done to make COP more inclusive from the perspective of an Indigenous person working on the ground?
Yeah, I think with the Pacific experience, for example, if I may talk about the Global Compact on Migration, which we were part, the process around that compact was actually very late in terms of consultation with the Pacific. And I knew about this because I was a youth representative for the Pacific through the Pacific Island Association for Non-Government Organizations. And I think from that experience, I honestly believe that, even if this next COP would minimize bringing people into the UK, perhaps tailor an approach that works for indigenous communities, because obviously technology is something that, may or may work because of connection issues and accessing phones or, gadgets that would enable participation of these communities and a much more advanced planning and logistic around outreach to these communities. Because oftentimes it is civil society representatives and activists who are already very familiar with conversations around climate change that has to shoulder the responsibility of coming back and being accountable to their communities to inform them and to liaise as a bridge between them and what's happening regionally or globally. So that has been the very crucial learning curve for us as well. And I honestly believe particularly if indigenous communities are engaged, a lot of consideration needs to really look at the approaches, the cultural competencies and cultural appropriateness of these approaches. That has to be heavily considered in the effort to consult the communities. Yeah, I hope that kind of helped with the answering the question.
Thank you, Ray. And yes, Erin.
Hello. I'd like to answer the question about localizing and funding. We at Green Hope face this challenge every day. This is a huge problem young people are facing, and we too have the same question for the United Nations. We at Green Hope do our best to ensure that we continue our work on the ground, but we've made our concerns heard with the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, so hopefully that will be addressed very soon.
Thank you, Erin. And yes, that does need to be addressed. So thank you, audience, for all of your very pertinent questions. And thank you, panelists, for your amazing answers. And I would now like to invite Miriam from the Parliament to speak to us about some of the climate action initiatives undertaken by the Parliament on the road to COP26. So Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank our panelists, Kekasha, of course, for moderating, and all our attendees for joining us today. I know there's a lot of programming happening virtually, and to Ray's point, sometimes the connection is not great, but it's always great to see all the people who are engaged and interested in really making a difference in the world. The Parliament itself is committed to a mission of sustainability and climate action. One of our main programs, and some of our main programs, include the Climate Commitments Project, which I talked a little bit earlier about, regarding the ways that some of the grassroots organizations are doing work within their communities, and the ways that people can learn more about what specific work that they're doing and the ways that they can get engaged. Catholic Dialogue on Climate Change. We published a Faith Action on the Sustainable Development Goals publication last year. And we also published the book Faith for Earth, A Call for Action, all of which provide some great resources and some great tools for organizers who are interested in getting involved in the movement. All of these programs have something in common. The organization's commitment to the engagement of guiding institutions like the United Nations, the engagement of spiritual and faith communities working to foster climate action, and of course, interfaith organizations that are collaborating in a shared mission of sustainability. The Parliament's Climate Action Program is a proud supporter of COP26. Our team is actually partnering with the UK COP26 presidency in hosting a webinar series this year. So in February, we hosted our first webinar, which was focused on the role of faith communities in COP26. The full recording of that program is available on the Parliament website and on our YouTube channel. for anyone who's interested in taking a listen to some of those conversations. We'll also have some upcoming webinars on nature and the just transition and the final push to Glasgow, which we hope you will be a part of. And one of the things that the Parliament is actively doing right now on the ground is partnering with UN Environment, the UN Multi-Faith Advisory Council, and others to map faith-based organizations planning activities and events ahead of COP26. So that's a short survey that we opened up to the community, and we hope that if you're interested in getting engaged or doing work on the ground, you can contact our team at info@parliamentofreligions.org, and we'd be happy to get you involved. On the screen, you can see some of the ways that you can engage with the Parliament. So we have the link to the Climate Commitments web hub, and we have some information how you can contact the UK COP26 unit. They were very helpful to us in our last conversation, and I think if anyone is interested in getting more involved and really fostering those conversations that we talked about today, that will be a great opportunity to get engaged. And then, of course, if you're interested in learning more about the Paris Climate Accord, there's a link on the screen that you can access. And all of this will also be available on our website. So if you're interested in exploring this as a resource, we'd be happy to have you engaged. And another great way that we hope you can join us is at the upcoming Parliament of the World's Religions. It's going to be hosted virtually for the first time in our history on October 17th and 18th. And we hope that we will continue to foster these intergenerational conversations in the lead up to the Parliament, but also during the Parliament. So, stay engaged. Our theme and our call for programs will be coming soon. And you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter and connect with us at parliamentofreligions.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And thank you for sharing the work that Parliament is doing in its climate action plan and really bringing together all levels of society and the interfaith movement into this, addressing this very important issue. So with that, I would like to invite our panelists to give their concluding remarks in about 1 to 2 minutes, and we'll actually go in reverse order. So Miriam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank all of you who joined us in this great conversation, to all our panelists, and of course to our attendees. I think everyone raised some great points about the ways that intergenerational conversations and multidisciplinary engagement are going to be critical as we move forward. I think, we didn't get to answer the question about funding, but I hope that that's a big conversation during COP26 about the ways that, our governments and the international community will continue to invest in the communities that are doing the work and that are going to be making active change in their communities.
Awesome. Thank you, Miriam. Erin, the floor is yours.
As I said earlier, I think that what we do in the next 29 years are paramount to mitigating climate change. And I look forward to the outcome of COP26 with everyone more determined to working to a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Ray, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to acknowledge everyone, particularly for especially for this very important conversation, and to be able to be part of it this morning. We continue as a specific communities. We continue to to call for recognition that all climate force migration relocation should be dignified, guarantee the rights, status, and protection for people who are forced to move, whether it is internal, external, permanent or temporary, upholding human rights and protecting livelihoods and cultures. And that closing particularly because I shared my talk this morning was kind of tied to the migration and relocation aspect of climate change work and why the urgency. Because if bigger countries do not commit to the solution, eventually a lot of vulnerable communities who are at the front line of climate change would be moving across borders. And that's something that, as young people, we do not want to leave our home. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ray. Magdalen?
Thank you, Kekishan, and thank you. It's been great to meet all the panelists today, and yeah, I'm really grateful to be able to be part of this conversation particularly happy to hear from you, Erin, about the work you've been doing. And the work of young people on this issue is so important, and we need to raise up your voices and keep going in what you're doing. And I hope that you get the funding that you so rightly seem to deserve for the work that you're doing. And I hope that everybody listening is feeling that they have their part to play, and that there is strength when our voices come together, and that this is absolutely needed, and the time is now. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Magdalen. Susan?
Thank you, and thank you again for allowing me to be part of this. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I think the future of the planet is in good hands with the engagement of all the people that we've heard this morning. The word that I would like to emphasize is ambition. This is not a time for settling for second best or just doing the minimum. This is a time to be ambitious. This is the time, for example, for governments to say, in my country, we will not sell petrol cars after a certain date. And it's hard. These decisions are hard. But if we're really going to make a difference, we have to take those hard decisions. And the goals for COP26 are really ambitious. And we, as the British government, are engaging across the globe with governments, some of whom are not in the same place as us on these issues, to encourage them to be as ambitious as we are being in this, and to make sure that the voices of everybody are heard as we move up to that fantastic event in the beautiful city of Glasgow in November. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you to all of our panelists for your insightful views and suggestions. And, the main hurdles that now need to be surmounted on the road to COP26 and beyond is how to engage with those affected most by climate change, those who have been displaced and affected by climate change into disasters, as was said, internal and external, how to leave no one behind and really ensure climate justice. And that will enable us to realize how intrinsically linked climate justice is to human rights. And the onus is really now upon all of us at all levels and all sectors of society to bring about change. As our panelists mentioned, we need ambition. We can no longer be complacent. We have to take action because the time to act is now. And the pandemic has shown us that this multilateral dialogue and the consequent actions that really benefit all are possible. So let us transplant that positive energy onto the actions to address climate change. The process of rebuilding can only become better if it's built on the principles of justice, values, and our common humanity. And let us make sure that this COP is just one milestone on the road to achieving climate justice, more likely, so that we don't just look at COP26 as the ultimate goal, but realize that there's so much more to do, and our ultimate goal should be that of a just, equitable, and sustainable world. So this COP has to be transformational because our future literally depends on it. So thank you once again, panelists. Please stay safe and do join us for our forthcoming discussions and webinars and ground level actions as we build the momentum for change. On behalf of the Parliament of the World's Religions Next Gen Task Force, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.